It was 1990. My boss at the time, Jean McCurdy, called a big group meeting where she got the entire studio together and said, well, yeah, we're coming to the end of Tiny Toons. You guys did a great job. We're looking to develop other properties to, sell another series, and one of them was Batman. After that meeting, I went back to my desk, and I had Tiny Toons work I was supposed to do, and I just shoved it in the corner, and I just started drawing Batman. And the next time Jean had one of those meetings, I showed her this sheet of drawings that I had done of Batman, and she went, wow, that's great. That's exactly what he looks like. Yeah, Batman animated. That's perfect. A month or two later, she specifically called me and Eric Radomski into her office. Eric was he was a background painter on Tiny Toons, and he had also, independently of me, had done some background treatments of what he thought Gotham City would look like. Jean said, I want you guys to put together a short Batman cartoon, kind of like a little mini pilot to show the studio heads what we're talking about, what we would be doing.
And Jean called Bruce and I together to say, we like your take on this thing. We'd like to see what you guys do together. That was the first time we met each other and thought, okay, cool, let's see what we can do.
So the first thing I did was I made color Xerox blow-ups of a whole bunch of old pulp covers from the 30s and 40s. So I had those plastered all over the walls for inspiration. The Fleischer Superman cartoons from the early 1940s, those were probably the strongest influence on the look of Batman and the series as well. We were just kind of like pushing the envelope, trying to say, let's make this as different from every other cartoon on TV, as possible.
Bruce pitched out the idea of what that scenario should be. A couple thugs on the roof, Batman shows up, dark and mysterious, takes them out and flies off heroically. And, it made sense, of course. It was appropriate for the character. It was just what we needed, just a couple minutes worth of material. Once it was an assembled piece and you saw that pan moving in multi-layers, suddenly Gotham City had life, and Batman was, absolutely going to work in this world.
The ironic thing about it was that in the meantime, while we were actually putting this cartoon together, the studio decided that they were going to go ahead with the Batman cartoon. The nice thing about it for me personally and for Eric was that we had this nice portfolio piece. So Jean was able to go to the studio heads and say, I want these guys to do this Batman cartoon, which again, Eric and I really weren't expecting that.
And lo and behold, they came back to us and asked us if we wanted to produce it. And I think both of us were just absolutely stunned. We thought, what are they thinking? We've never done this before. What the hell are we going to do? But it really, the promo stood on its own, and I think that was enough for anybody to think that if you guys pulled it off in this time frame and it looks this unique, we're going to have to try really hard to screw up the series.
Bootleg copies of it have gotten out, and it does show up at conventions occasionally. They're probably 18 million generations away from the original at this point, but I know people have seen it, so yeah, but it's still kind of a rare item. The show is just dark. It's like dark. It's like black on black.
The approach to the series in general was to try and make it feel timeless.
I wanted to go back to the comic books and really do a serious Batman show.
And it worked great, and it was just a show you wanted to watch again and again.
There was something about it that just punched you right in the face when you turned on the TV.
What made Batman the Animated Series just electrifying is that it was unlike anything else we'd ever seen on TV before, and that's what made it just so compelling.
The thing about the Batman Animated Series is that it took this world and it took it seriously without taking itself too seriously. So you had a world that you could believe in.
Early on, there were a lot of discussions about the direction of the series, and I would speak at length with Bruce about where he wanted the show to go and how he felt Batman should act and speak.
Initially, my own personal idea of Batman is quite a bit different than the way he is actually in Batman the Animated Series. Just the logistics of telling a story for television in a film medium. And a lot of the ideas that I had for Batman I knew really wouldn't work for a cartoon.
What Bruce and I both found a meeting of the minds on once we got to know each other and we started talking about what we wanted to do with the series, we both were interested in telling real stories. Telling mini movies is the way we were referring to them at the time. We didn't want it to have a typical Saturday morning type approach to the show.
They really knew the comics industry, and they knew Batman's history, and they knew all of the different years and different styles that went into making these characters what they were, and that's why the Batman Animated Series works so well.
When I first saw Batman the Animated Series, it was groundbreaking. What it did, it captured a style and tone that was completely different from anything else that we've seen in cartoon at the time.
We call it Dark Deco. Dark Deco world, which with some computer technology going for it. It's just another dimension of a contemporary world.
In my mind, it was sort of like, what if the 1939 World's Fair had gone on another 60 years or so? And that cool sense of design and stylishness from the Art Deco years was in operation well up until the 90s. That way you could have kind of a rounded look to the cars and a stylish look to the buildings. You could have television and computers, but everything would have a black and white screen. You could believe that Batman could operate in a world that looked like that.
Eric Radomski was the architect of the architecture, so to speak. He was mostly, I think, involved with the backgrounds. One of his ideas was to create the backgrounds on black paper so that people were drawing with lighter materials on this dark surface so that it created a moody atmosphere.
As dark as I can do the show, this is the way I would play it. I'd love to have characters moving in and out of the shadows. At night, you only see elements, you fill in the gaps. Kind of the perfect approach to Gotham City.
In terms of Batman, the animated series, the image that pops into my head every time will be the very first thing I ever saw, which is that shadowy figure of Batman standing on the rooftop.
Somewhere along the way, they decided we don't really need a title to this thing. It's Batman.
Nobody was doing anything like that before. And actually incorporating the Warner Brothers logo was really very old world. It was really cool. It made the show feel like it belonged in another time.
And the greatest shot is when Batman just leaps onto one of them, and you don't even see what he did to the guy, but the guy is just out. Everything you need to know about Batman is in that 30-second opening.
If you look at the main titles, there's no word that tells you it's Batman. We figured anybody in any language would be able to look at it and go, oh, it's Batman.
Bruce was very determined to tell the show as visually as possible, which was a challenge and a very bold direction.
It was kind of, guerrilla cartoon making to a degree, because we were just taking our skills and knowledge that we had accumulated, but at the same time, willing to throw the rule book out if we thought that we could get a cool cinematic effect out of it or a good storytelling device.
As a writer, I was always looking for ways I could bring little flourishes or extra value to every scene or every episode. I remember in Heart of Ice, one thing I wrote in the script, it's a cool way to show off Mr. Freeze's powers. He had to get into a building, so he ran over to a fire hydrant, kicked it open with his big old metal boot, and shot his freezing gun into the water coming out, and that acted as this big frozen geyser, lifted him up and put him in the building. Freeze! The thought process on Batman was great. Here, he's a character who doesn't talk much, which is as he should be. And I thought the more you can tell stories like that, the better the show is going to be.
You just feel a lot of responsibility about it because he is an institution. He's a special icon to a lot of people. You're not reinventing him. You're building on what he was and has been.
They went back to the core concepts of who Batman is. What was the motivation of the character? What were the things that mattered most to the character?
I've told Bruce and Paul from the beginning that I thought Batman is the real character, and Bruce Wayne is the disguise. That's the face he puts on for the world. Batman is who he is in his heart.
I think there's a lot of different levels to appreciate the character. There's a fun, chummy pal thing with him and Robin that kids can latch onto when they're little. And there's also a dark, tragic aspect of it that as you get older, you start to understand, and it feels more realistic.
I think one of the things I loved about Batman the Animated Series is that you can see the first episode, you can see the 10th episode, you can see the 3rd season, and still walk in as a first-time viewer and feel like it's touching upon everything that you know true to be about Batman and the characters that he fights.
Who are you? I'm your worst nightmare.
Batman has, by far, the greatest collection of villains in all of comics.
Oops! Looks like we're experiencing technical difficulty. But don't worry, folks. We're still on the air.
So often the Joker has been played as sort of like a harmless clown or a total raving psychotic madman, which actually defeats the purpose of doing the character, because then he becomes totally unsavory.
He had these really demonic, scary eyes and this tooth-filled grin that looked like the Blue Meanies in Yellow Submarine.
With the Joker, I felt we struck a nice balance between the clown and the killer. We also got into his personality a lot and really made him kind of a scary character. And he was a character that you didn't get bored with seeing.
Sherlock Holmes has his Professor Moriarty. Batman has his Joker. That's why the Joker's endured for so long. Most people would just go out and commit the crime. He likes to announce that he's going to do things and challenge you to stop him.
It is to laugh, huh, Mr. J?
Harley Quinn, yeah, my favorite.
Hear, hear!
Paul was right in this episode where he just kind of had this weird idea. It's like, oh, wouldn't it be fun if if one of the Joker's henchmen was a hench girl?
And then I just made her kind of a screwball who would say things with a goofy attitude, yet when the Joker called on her to pull a trigger, she could do it.
Harley Quinn was such a big hit. I mean, they've made toys and statues. They've incorporated her into the comic books. She has her own series. You know, I think Harley Quinn is a great foil for Joker.
I'm not an actor anymore. I'm not even a man.
I love the visuals of Clayface, and they did a terrific job with him. From being an actor to being this monster that can look like anybody, Clayface was really great.
All that dripping and all that, oh my gosh. It was a lot of hard work.
The transformation effects that they did on the Clayface character, they even went beyond what we had actually put on the board. I mean, we actually tried to throw in every trick we could think of at the time on how to make the shape-shifting look great. You know, they would have the head spin up and rotate and then morph into something else. To this day, that really stands out as like a real stellar piece of animation in Warner Brothers animation history.
Don't bother to adjust the picture. For the next 5 minutes, I'm in control.
Two-Face was the first character that we put our own stamp on. Fortunately, Alan Burnett came up with some really good psychological twists for the character that really had never really been seen before in the comics or elsewhere.
I actually consulted with psychologists to come up with a backstory that would be suitable for children's programs. I was interested in doing a show about a split personality who was already in trouble before he actually changed into Two-Face.
That whole play on the psychology of that character was really the most satisfying from the villain pool because, again, he was human and he had, he was torn. And that part of it was great fodder for good storytelling.
Harvey!
I've read every single Batman story ever published. I've listened to every radio show. I've seen every cartoon. I've read every book. And Heart of Ice is easily one of the best Batman stories ever told.
Since you ally yourself with my enemies, you leave me no choice.
My first script was the Mr. Freeze episode, Heart of Ice, and I had talked to Bruce about, hey, wouldn't it be cool to take the Mr. Freeze character in this direction? We had discussed the idea of a man with no emotions who had suffered a great tragedy, and that made him very cold.
Up until we got a hold of him in the Adam West show, he was obviously played kind of silly. He was always just kind of a generic, cold villain. He never really had any kind of psychological motivation or anything.
I guess it strikes a chord with me, seeing that villain portrayed so sympathetically, and seeing Batman try and understand that, and Mr. Freeze is almost more emotionally balanced than Batman is. It's really a cool dichotomy.
The best episodes of the animated series were moving because they were genuinely about characters, and genuinely about emotions, and genuinely about deep feelings, and they weren't just about people punching each other. And that's what made it a great show.
Now, the man who impersonated Bruce Wayne, I want his name.
They didn't just hire generic cartoon voice actors. Bruce and his crew set out to hire actors who happened to be in a cartoon show, and that made all the difference.
The name. Now.
Some of the characters we filled fairly easily, and then some of the ones we kind of had to keep looking for because we just weren't hearing what we wanted to hear. And Batman himself, being the most important character in the series, was also, not surprisingly, the most difficult part to cast.
Last chance. Talk!
And then we had one of those fine casting moments where an actor walked into the studio. His name was Kevin Conroy, and he got in front of the microphone and he opened his mouth and he finished his audition, and the room of producers and writers and people sat together and said, "We are done."
The minute he opened up his mouth and started reading the Batman dialogue, his voice went down into that Batman voice.
I just went to a very dark and private place in my vocal range, because it seemed like such a dark, private world he lived in.
And we all just kind of went, "Whoa, I think we got him. I think we got our Batman."
He's good, but no actor is that good.
The directive always was, don't think of it as animation, just read it like you were acting in a play.
I'm sure all the folks at home will enjoy sharing this special occasion.
With the Joker, I imagined I was in a 1930s radio drama.
They told us from the first day of recording, forget
cartoon sounds. We don't want any cartoon voices.
We cast a lot of actors who have what we call a voice with character, as opposed to an actor doing a cartoon voice. This is people who have either a recognizable sound or a quality to their voice that is special and identifiable.
More than familiar. It's identical.
One of the reasons why I remember the Grey Ghost story is because Adam West was the voice of the Grey Ghost.
You, like you said, you need my help.
When we were casting the part for the Grey Ghost, somebody suggested Adam West. We should get Adam West to play the Grey Ghost. And we all just kind of went, yeah!
There was a great parallel story being told between Grey Ghost's origin and Batman's origin. And the fact that they had Adam West playing that role just gave it more meaning and more resonance for me, somebody especially who grew up on the original Batman TV show.
That's one of the things that really helped set the Batman show apart from other cartoons on at the time, was that the high caliber of the vocal performances.
I'll cancel Master Bruce's rendezvous with Bambi, was it, sir?
Yes, Alfred. Do that.
Everybody was very impressed by the music that Danny Elfman had done for the first Batman movie, and we thought that was definitely the right direction to go, that kind of retro, noir, mysterioso kind of score. I'd remembered seeing a making of Batman documentary on TV, and I remember at the time being kind of surprised that Danny Elfman wasn't conducting the orchestra. Shirley Walker was conducting the orchestra, and I went, oh, who's this lady who's conducting the orchestra?
And speaking with her, she totally respected what we were doing. She was very collaborative in terms of what we wanted to do with this, and we had hoped for something that would sound like a movie score. Again, in keeping with the whole idea of mini movies, and she just nailed it. We owe so much to her in terms of, again, keeping up this level of class for a show.
From day one, the very first time, we actually went to the recording stage to listen to the orchestra play one of our scores, or play one of Shirley's scores for our show. It was, the opening of the Man-Bat show. I can clearly remember it, those trombones going, dong. And it was like chills up and down our spines. We were just like, wow, we're really onto something. This sounds just awesome.
You didn't experience anything like this before. It's an animated show, half-hour format, and suddenly you're totally taken into the world. You feel like you've seen a movie. Every time you watch the show, it never ceased to satisfy.
When we got the first show back, animated from Japan on leather wings, Eric and I both just breathed a huge sigh of relief. And even without the score or the sound effects on it, we knew, we'd kind of struck gold.
We were so jazzed when we saw that first footage. We saw Batman doing Batman stuff, and it was so cool, and it worked so well.
It was so stylized, and at first it took me a little while to get used to it because I looked at it and would say, boy, that's an awfully square jawline. Those ears are awfully pointy on Batman's costume. And then you watch 1, 2, 3 episodes and you realize that is absolutely right. It fits with the voices, it fits with the style. You hear that music and you see those images, and it blew me away. I thought it was stunning.
I think that the show really did help to define the way people looked at Batman.
Batman the Animated Series as a touchstone of Batman history and as a clear marker in the Batman timeline is as prominent as anything, I think. Is going to be as important to Batman's history, perceived that way now and in the years to come, as important as the New Look Batman in the 60s or the Dick Sprang Batman in the 50s. It really was a touchstone that not just cartoon guys, but comic book creators themselves have been able to draw from since then, and that sensibility and that sense of giving Batman that darker edge and that timeless quality to him. It's very much an important marker in Batman's history.
The legacy of Batman the Animated Series is going to be that it raised the bar for the standard of animation.
I thought some of these early cartoons especially were so well written, so beautifully animated, such a wonderful gift to those of us who love the comic books.
The greatest thing about the Batman series, it pioneered it for so many other things. Without what all these guys did on Batman, we wouldn't have Justice League, we wouldn't have the Superman animated series, we wouldn't have the Teen Titans animated series. We want them to survive and thrive and grow and change, but at the same time they have to keep their iconic status, and that's what these guys did.
Batman's character is going to be ongoing, so this is a nice chapter. I'm just pleased to have been part of that series.
Looking back on it, it was a pretty great time. It's hard for me not to idealize it as this sort of wonderful moment where we were all happy and blissfully doing our job and thinking, oh, we're making the Heart of Ice episode, we're making On Leather Wings, we're making something great. It's like, no, we were guys doing jobs, and a really good one came along.
For my money, this is the quintessential Ultimate Batman because it incorporates all aspects of the history of Batman.
It was the turning point in careers for all of us. And that was pretty cool because I think threw a lot of the guys on the show back to when we were kids and the shows and the films that we'd seen and thought, wow, that's great, I'd love to do that for a living, what a cool job. Suddenly we were in that place, and to have people react to it and enjoy the same things that we were enjoying, that was the ultimate satisfaction.
In a way, our version of Batman is, I think, at least I've heard from a lot of people from, who grew up watching the show, that's the Batman they think of when they think of Batman. It's like, oh yeah, that's, the Batman the Animated Series is Batman to me. So it's neat to be a part of that legacy.
I always thought you dubbed in your voice to match the actions of the drawn character, but not so. The voice becomes the structure of the performance, and the animator matches his drawings and sound and everything like that to that performance.
You know the rules. There are times when I can't explain
my actions even to you. Hey, that line worked great in 6th grade, but in case you hadn't noticed.
We'll discuss this later.
We record ensemble, which means all the actors are in the room, ideally at the same time, so that they can not only act, but they can react, which is a big part of acting.
It makes their editing process a lot more complicated, I'm sure, but it gives the performances that feeling of a real dramatic interaction.
Half of me wants to strangle you.
And what does the other half want?
To hit you with a truck.
We used to date.
I liken it most to the old radio shows, where all the actors are standing in front of their microphones with the music stand, and they've got their scripts. And that, of course, is one of the joys of voice acting, is you don't ever have to memorize a line of dialogue. Your script is right there in front of you.
My word.
You can't turn to deliver a line because then you're off mic. So we're just totally dependent upon ears.
Thanks for coming after me.
I owed you.
Well, I'd like to think our relationship isn't just restricted to saving each other from freaks and weirdos.
Kevin Conroy, who played Batman, and I were probably never facing each other whenever we worked because all of the actors were seated in a straight line facing the engineering booth.
Maybe we'd have a place for each other without Gotham, without the freaks, maybe without masks.
Maybe.
They used to kid me because I was the only one who would stand up.
Yes, well, this is all tremendously boring.
They had these little, those separators that you see, like, for musicians so your sound doesn't bleed into other people's mics. And everybody's sitting down at their little music stand, and I just thought to energize the character, to shake my fist, and I felt I've got to stand up.
What do you think we can do about that? Joke!
Very often I'll hear Bruce Timm over my shoulder. He's usually sitting behind me. I'll hear him say to the guys who are drawing the character design or whatever, doing the storyboard, watch what that actor's doing, because I want you to draw that in the storyboard.
Sometimes you don't even know, where you are. You don't know what the visual is around you. I mean, Andrea Romano, our director, would be sitting in the booth saying, okay, you're running over the top of a roof, you jump, you land 20 feet, you turn, you see him on your left-hand side, you grab the golden statue and take off, and the 3 villains come in, and grab you. And then we'd start doing the dialogue.
I love voiceover animation because people can't see you. You make these choices that you would never do if you were doing a live action role.
See, Batsy, I think of everything.
The other thing that I had no experience at and learned, sort of on the job was the special effects sounds. Catwoman lands on her feet. Well, what does that sound like? She punches somebody in the face. All of those kinds of things that it doesn't usually come up in conversation.
A lot of the talent on this show had never done animation before, which was just a direction they wanted to go in terms of how dramatic they wanted to make it. It led for some really wonderful actors coming on the show.
We cast a lot of actors who have what we call a voice with character. And so when we cast, for example, Bob Hastings as Commissioner Gordon, every time he opens his mouth, that's Commissioner Gordon.
Listen here, you simpering little twit.
You were foolish enough to invite the Penguin.
I had no experience with animation, and I just went in basically on a voiceover audition. I said, well, let me just come up with some voices. Let me just try some stuff. So I came up with this very dark, and I went into this whole other place that no one else had gone to, I guess. And I saw them all running around in the booth, and I realized that I had touched a nerve.
The room of producers and writers and people sat together and said, we are done. We have found the voice of Batman.
If I'd gotten there 5 minutes sooner, how long before I let someone else I care about down? Leslie, Alfred, you.
One of the things that informs the Joker is his laugh. And I remember reading the comic books, it was ha 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 ha, but lots of ho ho hee hee ho ho hee. His laugh should be like a musical instrument. It should sort of illustrate his mood. It could be ominous and intimidating.
Yeah.
It could be gleeful and with wild abandon. But I didn't want to just have one rote laugh. I was driving in the first recording session thinking, how did I laugh? I'm out on the freeways in Los Angeles. No, that's not it. No, that's not it. Now, I'm sure no one in Los Angeles would look twice at somebody. Look at that guy laughing maniacally in his car.
She's got a great sardonic sense of humor.
Almost got him.
There's I'm sexier than you are, I guess, is what is in her voice. And I know it, and I know you know it.
You were supposed to stay out of trouble.
Don't tell me you're my very own private probation officer. How often would you like me to check in?
Catwoman has to be pretty tough and strong. She's really, level with Batman. You couldn't really have a light-voiced actress, someone who really couldn't pull it off. We needed someone whose voice had strength to it and who could actually be a true foe for Batman, as well as being sexy, and for there to be that attraction as well.
You're hot.
Now you notice.
Ephraim has to express discipline, love, respect, all in the same 5 or 6 words of dialogue.
I do wish you wouldn't be so rough with your toys, Master Bruce.
Batman likes him, and he, of course, is very respectful towards his boss.
Dining in tonight, sir?
The dissection tray, please, Alfred.
A tiny bit irreverent, but always in good taste and in moderation.
We did the voices for a good 6 to 9 months in '91 before any artwork came back, and then had to start doing ADR to sync up the voices. And Mark Hamill and I were in the ADR room together the first day, and they start in the sound room in this full screen with these full speakers going on. This symphony score comes up, and this lights come on, and this, full screen image of the show. Can you imagine what it was like to be sitting there? And we were both just, they came time for us to do our lines, we were both just staring like this. I looked at him, I said, did you have any idea that this is what we were working on? He said, I didn't have a clue that this was gonna look like this. It was breathtaking, it was so beautiful. It's a cultural icon. And to be a part of that, it's an honor.
Batman's a terrific hero, but he's only as good a hero as he is surrounded by other terrific supporting characters.
Since Batman's the quiet guy, on that rooftop somewhere, you have to have other characters who are going to sit around and you're actually going to follow them through the story.
Even Batman doesn't operate in a vacuum. And without more human characters around to balance him out, he runs the risk of going completely off the deep end and becoming that which he is fighting, and that's just, a creature that's totally evil.
Sometimes, old friend, I wonder if I'm really doing any good out there.
How can you doubt it? The lives you've saved, the criminals you've brought to justice.
Just as Batman is a mentor father figure to Robin, Alfred has been a mentor and father figure to Bruce Wayne.
It really felt like a father and son relationship, and I think that helped, helped humanize the characters, and it gave a level of maturity to the show.
I'm sure revenge can be deliciously sweet. However, at the moment, he needs a friend. Isn't that what you needed, sir?
Alfred recognized in Bruce this thirst for vengeance and knew that without a guiding hand, Bruce Wayne could become as evil as the creatures he was fighting.
Alfred was that voice of reason that tried to coax him along and tried to help him to move beyond his tragedy.
Looks like trouble at Tarnower Financial, Alfred. I won't be home early after all.
Please don't take this the wrong way, sir, but your goose is cooked.
He was always great for lightening Batman's dark, brooding mood, you know. He could just say some quip or something as Batman's getting ready to jump in the car and go off for the night, you know. And it was just refreshing to have that dry wit.
Ephraim brings that kind of grandfatherly warmth to the character. I mean, he was, you know, stiff upper lip and British and all that, but deep down inside you could tell he was just, you know, full of heart. And, you know, again, that's all praise to Ephraim for that.
Might I suggest, Master Bruce, that you take a break? If you keep pushing yourself like this, you soon won't know your right hand from your left.
Alfred, you're brilliant.
So I've heard.
I mean, this is the guy who is the only one who can talk straight to Batman, but he does it sort of on the slant. He's an observer, and he sees things and brings up things that Bruce might be thinking about or should be thinking about, and he's really important.
Got a new toy, I see.
I figure it might come in handy.
It might get you in trouble with the mayor.
Let me worry about the mayor.
I've always thought of Jim Gordon as a man who is a decent cop at heart and a very compassionate person, yet who finds himself trying to preserve order in probably the worst city on the face of the earth. And yet he has to follow certain rules and regulations, and the only way to preserve order in the city is to break those rules.
Tell Bullock he should add more guards, just to be safe.
Is there anything you don't know about? I only assigned that detail a couple of hours ago. One of these days, I'm gonna nail his feet to the ground.
Commissioner Gordon was kind of like the Frank Miller Batman, Return of the Dark Knight, like really gave the guy like major competence. Like the guy was like a really competent cop. And I think that's pretty much what Bob Hastings, you know, his voice really embodied that, you know, very mature, very fatherly voice.
The bust went down okay?
Yes. Get some rest now.
Gotta keep fighting, never stop. Maybe if I'd been younger, could have been like you. Always wanted to be a hero.
You are a hero, Jim.
Commissioner Gordon often would appreciate the fact that Batman was there because, you know, the crimes were always so huge and the villains so, you know, maniacal that there was no way Commissioner Gordon and his band of police were going to do much about it. So the fact that Batman was there was a relief, and at the same time it caused problems because almost by nature, the fact that he existed, you know, the villains were going to be there, and it just caused problems for Commissioner Gordon.
Hey, where you going? This ain't over yet, outlaw! You hear me? You're going down for this! I ain't talking law! I'm talking you and me!
There was a character in the comics, Harvey Bullock, the kind of slobby detective character who'd been in the comics for about 10 years or so at the point that we did the show. We knew he would be a great foil for Commissioner Gordon, so we decided we'd draft him into our animated version.
There was no sign of forced entry here, you know, so I'm figuring somebody must unlock the cages and look the other way.
We didn't want to make Bullock really a dirty cop, so we made him kind of a soiled cop, but not completely dirty. There is a small spark of goodness in the guy.
Nobody's sneaking in here tonight.
If I got in this easily, so will the Joker.
Hey, this is police business. Haul your bat butt out of here.
He really does believe that preserving the law is a cop's job, which leads him into conflict with Batman on numerous occasions. Like, what do we need the weirdo in the cape for when, you know, guys like me are out busting their butt to keep the streets clean?
Qué mala suerte.
Renee Montoya was a character that we had created for the series in order to diversify Batman's world a little bit.
Simmer down, party boys. You'll be out tomorrow morning.
I think it was interesting to have this really smart, hard-nosed female counter to Bullock, and again, yet another piece of competition for him.
told you to take the day off.
Leslie Tompkins is sort of the angel of mercy in Bruce Wayne's world. She was a friend of Bruce's parents, and she was there for Bruce the night that his parents were murdered.
Every year, Batman goes and deposits the bouquet of roses at the site where his parents were killed, and she's aware of that and keeps the appointment with him to go to that spot. She was a significant influence in Bruce Wayne's life, and somebody that he could share his secret with and that understood why he functioned the way he did.
Just a minor concussion, probably from the fall. Here, take one of these every 4 hours, though why I ever bother is beyond me. You never follow my instructions.
She's the closest thing Bruce Wayne will have to a motherly influence in his life. She knows that Bruce is Batman, and she knows that he has shouldered this burden to protect the city. When Batman gets really hurt, the guy can't usually go to a hospital, so thank goodness Leslie Tompkins is there and she can administer some aid and comfort.
Catwoman, it's me.
Batman?
You're hot.
Now you notice.
I always think of Catwoman as the ultimate temptation in Batman's world. If anybody comes close enough to both Batman and Bruce Wayne as someone who could figure out both sides of his personality, it's Selina Kyle. Yet, she's a little too far into the darkness for him to completely embrace her. It's like there's a fine line between them, and they're both standing on either side, and they're kind of waving to each other, but she can't go totally into his world, and he knows if he goes completely into hers, he could never come back.
If you ever don your Catwoman costume again to violate the law, I'll not only revoke probation, I'll throw the book at you.
Batman's world is very black and white, and Catwoman clearly represents the gray. Clearly, she sees a greater good in the world, and sometimes you need to step into the gray to get to that.
Well, I'd like to think our relationship isn't just restricted to saving each other from freaks and weirdos, and that maybe we'd have a place for each other without Gotham, without the freaks, maybe without masks.
There's always a great temptation there. There's always a lot of wistfulness between the two of them. There's always a lot of longing and wondering what if it could happen. And they've been close, very close. But part of the curse of being Batman is that, whereas she is probably the perfect woman for him, she will always be just forever out of reach.
The cool thing about the environment, the universe that was created, was that we were allowed to explore different manifestations and different characters.
You got to have this supporting cast, around Batman, and it creates this interesting, colorful world and creates the world of contrast.
We didn't have to just have a cast of hundreds of nameless, useless characters that did nothing more than voice the dialogue. These characters added value to the history of Batman as we were trying to make it.
Robin brings a certain child appeal to the Batman universe. A lot of times kids really look for a stronger, heroic role model to identify with, and they fantasize, not so much could I be that character, but could I work with him?
What we've got here is a variation on the ancient Chinese puzzle box.
Can you solve it?
You kidding? You're looking at the guy who solved the Baxter's box puzzle in 37 seconds.
Back in the day when they first created Robin for the comics, the idea was supposed to be a point of view character for the kid audience. Theoretically, the idea was that kids could read the comic and know that they couldn't actually be Batman, but they could be Robin. So they could envision themselves having adventures with Batman.
Thanks for saving my bacon, Robin. Hey, no problemo, Batman.
They love the idea that they could be standing side by side with Batman, riding in the Batmobile, fighting the Joker and the Penguin and all the bizarre villains.
We initially kind of used him off and on. He would appear in some episodes, and other episodes he didn't, just where it seemed to make a lot of sense.
Why can't I go with you? What's the deal?
I'm working alone tonight.
People expected to see Robin. He's part of the Batman world, and you can't go too long in there without wondering, where is he? What's he doing? What take do they have on Robin this time?
Robin was there in several of the first scripts. We just didn't put him up front.
Listen, it'll only take a minute to get into my costume.
Not this time, Dick.
But Robin does have a really good origin story, so we felt that was a really good, you know, springboard for an episode.
I think, you know, Robin's Reckoning was the opportunity to present the character and give him some backbone for our series.
Bruce Wayne saw Robin orphaned as a child in the circus. He immediately identified with what he had gone through himself when he saw his own parents murdered. I think he also saw in him, you know, a child at the crossroads who needed someone.
For however long it takes, you have a home with us.
The relationship with Dick Grayson was kind of one as a foster parent. So just as Alfred was kind of the father figure to him growing up, he was the father figure to Dick Grayson.
Kind of what we did was to make Robin a grown-up and put him in college so he and Batman get together occasionally and fight crime together, but for the most part, Dick Grayson's away at college and occasionally he comes home for like the holidays or whatever, and you know, he and Bruce go suit up and go out and beat up the bad guys.
I don't get to do this much since I started college.
I was pretty glad that the decision was finally made to have Robin be older in our show.
We can have Dick Grayson get into slightly more sophisticated adult situations where a child would be, you know, suspect. You know, a kid can't go easily into places where a college student can.
Listen, dipstick, Batman's my pal. He can be a major jerk, but you gotta love him. And nobody tries to fillet him when I'm around.
There was actually kind of a stress on making Robin like this happening teenage hero. He had a bunch of character designs that he just had done. I just looked and like Robin, I just thought, you know, he just made him punk and cool.
I've waited a long time.
In the comic books at the time, Neil Adams had redesigned the costume so he wasn't, you know, he didn't have the bare legs and the little pixie boots and stuff anymore. They'd kind of given him a little bit more of a multicolored ninja outfit. And it was still multicolored, but it was a little bit cooler looking than the traditional Robin costume. So we took that as our starting point visually.
There was a little bit of confusion because we were using a more modern costume, but, you know, it was clearly Dick Grayson. We made it, you know, we wanted to make it traditional in other aspects.
You can do it.
When we take a character from the comics and translate them into the animation, quite often there's not one specific version of that character that we want to translate exactly to the screen.
You know, we looked at a lot of different elements that had gone into Robin over the years, just as we had looked at the many different elements that had made up the more successful parts of Batman, and picked and chose from them.
He's a composite of all of the old Robins, from Burt Ward to the Neil Adams incarnation in the comics.
We didn't want to do the goofy, you know, aw shucks, wisecracking sidekick, you know. We avoided that.
It was a hard and fast effort to toughen him up a bit, to give him a little bit of a little unique quality to our show, but also a strength of his own. And still we had to deal with, you know, red and green colors. So it was, as far as I was concerned, I think we even joked, may as well just paint a target on his back because there was no way he was hiding in the shadows.
Let's take it by the numbers. Nice and easy.
Yeah, time to kick some butt.
Good thing we had that little chat.
When we had created our version of Dick Grayson, we put that character on sort of an emotional journey, going from the young daredevil partner of Batman to someone who was growing up to juggle college life and crime fighting, to someone who had realized over a period of time that crime fighting Batman's way was not really working for him.
Oh no, he's not gonna ace me out. Master Dick, you... Not this time, Alfred. Maybe not ever again.
I mean, he was just as committed to crime fighting and to justice, but he wanted to be his own man. So a new identity was called for, so he chose the identity of Nightwing. There was still that need for Batman to have a young partner, so we decided, let's go back and make him the younger version of Robin.
The kid Robin that we did in The New Adventures of Batman was a combination of both Tim Drake and Jason Todd.
Jason Todd was a version of Robin that was created for the comics in, I believe, the late 70s. Served as Robin for several years, and the fans liked him. He ultimately went down a darker path and wound up being murdered by the Joker, which was a very strong story and one that we couldn't do in our series, so we ultimately abandoned it.
The current Robin that they had in the comics was Tim Drake. We decided he should be Tim Drake, but Jason had a really good origin story. So we made him Tim Drake. He had Jason's origin, and he had some of Jason's characteristics. So he's really kind of a half and half, you know, conglomerate of the two different Robins.
Kind of felt we'd done the dark stuff enough, and there was a chance to lighten and have the show be more fun. Just worked having a younger character in there.
I don't really know why the concept of Robin works as well as it does.
I'm thinking.
Except for the fact that it gives Batman somebody to constantly be, you know, bouncing dialogue off of.
You sure about this extortion ring?
Uh-huh.
It's been 4 hours.
Uh-huh.
You still think they'll show?
Uh-huh.
Lucky for me, you're such a good conversationalist.
Robin is necessary in that he yanks Batman back from the abyss.
It served its purpose to have, to humanize Batman a little bit more. And that was the goal. Robin did that well.
Robin just, by the nature of his personality, kind of prevents him from being quite as dark a person.
I love that trick, but I can never make it work.
Bruce Wayne is so totally close to the darkness, he'll always have that in him. Robin, however, has in him other qualities, which his association with Batman really brought out. He's a bit of a more optimistic character. I also think he's a bit more of a leader, as his career went on to prove.
From day one, we thought that we'd eventually get Batgirl into the show.
There was some, oh no, why does it have to be a Batgirl? Many more people were curious to see how we'd approach it.
The girl audience, they have a character that they can identify with that can be a superhero. There's a big part of Batman lore going back to the comics and the TV show and the serials, and that included Robin. And another big part of the Batman mythos was, you know, Batgirl.
There's always been a basic appeal factor of Batgirl. We always liked the character, and it was just a matter of integrating her.
She's had many different incarnations, from being Commissioner Gordon's niece to being his daughter, and eventually ended up being a wheelchair-bound and the computer genius and character called Oracle.
Touchdown.
Looking back at all the different previous versions of the character from the comics and the TV shows and what have you, and, you know, I'm picking and choosing elements of the characters that we liked and kind of smushing them all together and create, you know, the Batman the Animated Series version of that character.
Dad, you in here?
The version of Batgirl that always worked best for us was Commissioner Gordon's daughter, because that made it a little bit more of a family. There was a direct link there.
She's basically based on the previous looks from the comics and the TV show. Of course, we did want to put our own spin on it. In the comics, her costume was black. In the TV show, it was like a dark, dark purple. We figured she would, you know, make it as much like Batman's as possible, so she would make it dark gray, like his costume. But she would like swap out the black on the leather parts for blue, just because it's girlier. When we later on did what we call the revamp episodes, we took that opportunity to go back and tweak her design a bit and actually put her in the black costume just because it looks better.
I think it was much more like the character herself, sort of evolved, so her visual look sort of paralleled her emotional development as well.
The way that the animated series handled her so successfully is by introducing her slowly as the daughter of the commissioner, not just having her first appearance be the first appearance of Batgirl, which made fans like myself just anticipate, like, man, when is she going to become Batgirl?
We actually got a chance with the Heart of Steel episodes to give a little foreshadowing of her intelligence and her pluck and where she could go, and it was pretty cool. It was a good setup.
What am I gonna do? There's nobody I can trust.
What we wanted was a reason for her to become Batgirl, as opposed to, say, you know, Weasel Woman or something like that. And so we gave her a reason to dress up in the Bat costume.
The public respects you. If they see you there, they'll know Dad's innocent.
Sorry. When she puts on the Batgirl costume, she realizes that having the Batgirl persona actually is a plus for the mission that she has to do.
Initially, she's a fan that dons a costume, but comes into her own, entirely independent. She's not raised by him or influenced by him in any direct way, except by being this mythic character.
She has seen his heroism and wants to emulate that, and despite the obviousness of her red hair, she puts on a costume that allows her to go out there and create her own identity as an adjunct to this famous superhero in Gotham.
In the original animated series, she never became a full-time member of the group. She wasn't a part of the team, so to speak. She was more of a freelancer, I think.
I may not have a diploma from crime fighting school, but I can do fine on my own, thanks.
She's very capable, but on the other hand, she is new at this, and Batman has had years of training and experience, and he knows exactly what to do, where it may take Batgirl a second or two to figure out, oh man, I'm over my head, you know, how the heck do I get out of it?
Don't worry, you pretty little head.
One of the things that we really didn't want to do with the character that we knew right off the bat was that one of the things that always bugged me about Batgirl on the old Adam West show, she was never allowed to hit anybody. She always stood on a table and did these little dainty kicks at the villains, you know? She was never allowed to just slug the villain, you know? So we wanted to make sure that she was fully athletic, and again, being the daughter of a cop, you know, she would have taken self-defense courses and stuff. So she's just as much a brawler as you know, the two boys.
We never made a conscious decision to only pair up Batgirl with female villains. In her early appearances, you know, she's taken on the big boys. She goes up against Two-Face, and she goes up against big city corruption and a smear campaign against her father. There's that great scene on the boat where she, you know, faces off against the guy and takes him down on her first case. We had her go up against Scarecrow. We had her go up against a number of villains.
Yes. Am I glad to see you?
Do you mind?
At first, I don't think Batman particularly welcomed her presence.
It takes more than a costume and an attitude to do this work.
She was the girl on the outside who kind of wanted to play with the boys, and the boys were kind of like going, you know, no girls allowed in our club.
Run along home now.
Where she does not have necessarily the same driving force in her background that Bruce has that keeps him out on the streets every night. She does have a sense of adventure and a dedication to preserving the common good, and he respects that, and so he came to allow her along. Batman trusted her as an ally, if not an equal.
In the first Batman the Animated Series, we tried to keep Batman a loner as much as possible, but a lot of the New Adventures of Batman wasn't just a revamped look. We kind of wanted to take a look at the entire thing and say, okay, well, what could we do differently that we didn't do last time? So we pretty quickly, you know, brought her right into the Batcave and had her officially join the team.
Miss me?
We had hinted that there was going to be a relationship between her and Dick Grayson, but by the time we had approached the 4th season, Dick had evolved into a different character and a darker character. When he came back as Nightwing, the relationship that he had with Barbara had changed.
I thought it'd be much more interesting if Batgirl had a crush on Batman.
We even suggested that they had a relationship, and, you know, as said as much in the later episodes and in Batman Beyond.
And of course the fans are all going, oh, that's just so wrong. And it's like, well, that's why we did it, because it's more interesting. You know, it's like, yeah, it is wrong. It's meant to be wrong.
Batgirl, what's next?
She seemed to be favorably received by the fans. I think people really liked the character.
What's he saying? Dork.
Clearly, Batgirl's a much more lighthearted character. She's fun, you know? She's got big red hair hanging out of her costume, and, you know, how angry could she be?
Nice guy, but a few bats short of a belfry.
With Batgirl, you get a lot of the audience's wish fulfillment that they could be a part of the Batman universe.
I'm sure I'll catch you again.
Right off the bat with this first episode, we wanted to kind of make a statement, as it were. We wanted to say right away that this is not any other version of Batman than you've ever seen. It's not the Adam West version. It's not Tim Burton's version. It's not, you know, Super Friends, certainly not Super Friends. It was our Batman. It was what we considered to be kind of the best of Batman. You know, we drew from all those different sources, all, you know, from the comics and from Adam West and from, you know, even the movies to a degree. But we tried to do a distillation of what we felt was really, you know, important about Batman. So even with the very first episode on Leather Wings, we felt it was really important to concentrate more on mood, mystery, atmosphere, drama, as well as all the superheroic action. that's one of the reasons why we chose the Man-Bat character as the first villain that Batman faced. I mean, we got to the Joker pretty quick. I mean, he's in episodes 2 and 3. But literally the first story that came into our heads was this Man-Bat character. He was a Batman character from the 70s, and he became kind of a really important part of Batman's rogues gallery in the comics, but he'd never really been done in animation or in film before. And he's kind of I mean, he's literally the opposite of Batman. I mean, he's Man-Bat. He's a man who has turned himself into a bat through this, this weird scientific experiment. And he's more of a monster, more of like an old-fashioned movie monster. And so we felt that would give us a really good opportunity to explore the darker, more mysterious, more horror movie kind of elements of Batman that had never really been explored before in any kind of film medium. The first Joker episode, Christmas with the Joker, was an idea that Paul Dini was working on with another writer named Eddie Gorodetsky. And Paul just thought it was a kind of a fun way to go with the Joker, which, again, hadn't really been explored too much in animation or in the movies. And the fact that Paul has always felt that one of the things that motivates the Joker is unfair jokes, jokes that are completely out of line. And so he thought, well, what better way to do that than, on Christmas Eve to do a parody of, old-fashioned Christmas TV specials, variety shows, and where the Joker's going to basically, find a bunch of innocent people, and we say between the lines that he's going to do away with them on national TV unless Batman can stop him before midnight. And we thought that was kind of a sick but fun idea. And there was a lot of discussion internally and as well with the broadcast standards and practice department at Fox with how far we could actually go with that story. And some of the darker elements of the story got kind of toned down, but it still holds up pretty well. Still the intent is there, and it's maybe a little bit more of a comedy than a pitch black comedy, as it were. But I don't think we actually found the true voice of the Joker until probably, I don't know exactly which episode, but about halfway through the series, again with the introduction of the Harley Quinn character and some of the other ways we went with the Joker. These early Joker episodes are a little bit, we still hadn't quite figured his character out yet. The villain in Nothing to Fear is, again, he's a well-known character from Batman's rogues gallery going back to, I think, the 40s or the 50s, the Scarecrow. And I'm not sure he'd ever really been done before in animation. He may have been done, as a walk-on character or something in Super Friends, but as far as I know, he'd never really been, a major presence in any of the previous incarnations of Batman. And so again, we felt, a guy whose motif is, a scarecrow, and he's literally all about, scaring people. I mean, he's this psychologist who's gone off the deep end and who literally is studying the effects of fear on people, but to the point where it's, way beyond, any kind of acceptable measure of human restraint, and, goes over the edge and becomes a supervillain. And we thought that was an interesting character. We could do a lot with that. Again, the Scarecrow character was a character who kind of constantly evolved. We kept thinking, the character's still not quite right. And every time we do a Scarecrow episode, we'd say, okay, well, let's mess around with him a little bit, find out, what makes him tick. Even his visual changed. Like almost every time you saw the Scarecrow, he looked different. In this episode, this is our very first Scarecrow episode that we did with him. He looks very much like he does in the comics. He's got, like this bag over his head with a jack-o'-lantern type face and the wacky straw hat and everything. But he just didn't look scary enough. For a guy who's supposed to be the Scarecrow, we felt he should be really, really scary. And the interesting thing is the initial character designs that one of our artists, Mike Kim, had designed, he was not just a Scarecrow, but his body was all kind of twisted and kicked. And it gave him kind of a loose, real Scarecrow type appearance. Unfortunately, when the episode was animated, the animators didn't really follow that, so he kind of just moves like a regular human being, even though he's really, really skinny. And so we felt, okay, well, that didn't really work. So the next time we went back to the Scarecrow, we changed his appearance again. We kind of made his face a little bit scarier. We put eyes inside his eye sockets to kind of give him a creepy stare. We gave him long hair. Still didn't work. So I don't think we ever really quite got the Scarecrow right until, in the when we did the new Batman episodes for the WB, we actually went back and said, okay, you know what, this whole Scarecrow thing is not exactly working. Let's completely, rethink the character, and we came up with a really, really frightening look for him, and an even more out there kind of origin story for him. This new look that we came up with for him was so extreme and so creepy that we felt, okay, you know what, this is so good that we don't ever want to see this guy out of costume ever again, because we don't want to ever, you know, maybe this guy is literally a ghost or something. We wanted to keep him more mysterious. Poison Ivy never appeared as a character, as far as I know, in the, I'm pretty sure she was never in the Adam West version of Batman, and I don't think she was ever in Super Friends or the Filmation Batman cartoons of the 60s. A lot of the best Batman villains have interesting psychological motivations, and her big thing is that she feels that plants are being mistreated and misused, and, you know, a lot of things that man does in the world, you know, with pollution and things, are, you know, harming the environment. So she's, even though she's definitely a villainess, she, you know, she actually has somewhat noble motivations, but she goes about, you know, setting things right in the wrong way. So that gave us a lot to work with her character. Also, she's probably our most blatant example of the old-fashioned, you know, femme fatale. You know, she's the archetypal, you know, evil woman, if you will. We even have her in this episode. One of our supporting characters is Harvey Dent, who eventually became Two-Face, the villain Two-Face. We hadn't gotten to that point in the series yet. We actually did a whole bunch of episodes with him just as Harvey Dent, the DA, to set him up so that when we turned him into Two-Face, it would have a little bit more of an emotional impact. In this episode, she's actually engaged to Harvey Dent, but she actually has ultimately evil things in mind for him as well. The actual costume is based very much on what they did in the comics, but one of the interesting things is that literally in the comics, the tunic portion of her costume is literally made out of, you know, hundreds of leaves, and that's just way too much line work to animate. So we had to come up with a way of simplifying that for animation. So we kind of came up with just this one-piece bathing suit kind of outfit with flowered scallops on the edges, which would kind of give a leaf type motif, and then we put like thorny type protrusions on her gloves and her boots to kind of get the idea that, you know, she's, you know, a dangerous flower as well. The actual look of the character, at the time, I was, as we all were, we were all kind of learning how to, you know, design for this medium. You know, it's a straight realistic action adventure show, but at the same time, it's got cartoony styling, and we were trying to figure out how to combine the two. So, in particular, the women characters were giving me trouble. I was having a hard time, you know, designing the women characters, and they were coming out a little bit too masculine or too stiff. And so there was an artist that I had known for years named Lynn Naylor, who excelled in doing real cartoony but, you know, cute and appealing, you know, women characters. So we actually hired her to do a bunch of different character designs for Poison Ivy and for the Renee Montoya character, who's a Hispanic policewoman, and the Summer Gleason, who's the newscaster. And she did just dozens and dozens of Poison Ivy drawings, and from taking, you know, the best of her sketches, I kind of combined them all and kind of came up with the final Poison Ivy model. Well, again, reflecting the kind of creative differences that were happening amongst our staff, this was a story that some of us were a little bit uncomfortable with, because we felt it was maybe a little bit more like an old-fashioned Super Friends episode where the Joker really didn't have a real strong motivation for what he was doing, and he was basically just kind of causing trouble, but not really for any intent and purpose. And Batman's involvement in the show we felt was a little bit unmotivated. I mean, you know, obviously the Joker's going to cause trouble, Batman's going to stop him, but we felt it was kind of lacking some of the more psychological, character-driven elements that we wanted to see in Batman. Mm-hmm. Having said that, working with the writers and with the, you know, the director, Kevin Altieri, of this episode, we, you know, tried to, you know, kind of, okay, well, let's not worry too much about the story elements that don't work. Let's concentrate on the ones that do work and stage them as well as possible. So Kevin Altieri and his crew, his storyboard crew, really worked really hard to make the action scenes as exciting and as cinematic as possible, and I think they did a great job. One of the great things about Batman is that he does have, like, as everybody knows, just about the best rogues gallery of any superhero, any comic book character.
It seems like Batman's villains are all sick. They all have obsessions.
They're all interesting, grotesque types They weren't just guys in suits. They were all as interesting and quirky as Batman himself was.
What? You have who tied up where?
Well, the cool thing about the Batman villains is they all had their own individual fetish and motif. It's once you get to know them, the complexity in their personalities is what makes them really interesting.
Wait! I got a crisis here!
My dear, you don't know the meaning of the word.
As Batman has no true superpowers, few of his enemies do either. It's a psychological need that drives Batman to be Batman, and I think it's a very similar psychological quirk that creates his villains.
I'd like to dislocate them both.
The villains give direction to the show. You can even call them the protagonist. They're the ones who want to get to this goal, and Batman's their antagonist, and he's going to stop them.
What say we have a little talk, just like old times?
Did get to spend so much time with the villains, we kind of got to understand, their motivations and their backstory, and sometimes that was the story.
Say hello to your new, improved Harley Quinn!
A lot of Batman's villains, they've planned something out, and it's pretty diabolical, and Batman finds himself caught up in this machine trying to figure out how he's going to end up stopping it, and doing so before anybody gets hurt.
Oh, no.
We all have the good side and the bad side. It exists in every single one of us.
You're breaking my heart. Sayonara, chumps.
And once you can relate to it, it's captivating.
The Batman villains always seem like they're having a lot of fun.
There was never any shortage of good Batman villains.
You're only as good as the villain you fight.
Got it?
Scarface. Better look sharp, you smugs. Scarface is back.
Of all the new Batman villains they've introduced into the comics over the last, 20 or 30 years, the Scarface and Ventriloquist seem to me the most like classic Batman villains.
Nobody pulls my strings, dummy. Especially not you.
But you're not real!
That notion of the ventriloquist who doesn't even know the dummy is calling the shots fits right into Batman's world.
This evil dummy is coming out of his head.
The ventriloquist himself was so demented and yet played so much like your grandfather or your uncle.
Scarface and the ventriloquist are another set of characters where you have the option to hire one actor to do both voices or hire two different actors so that you get completely different sounds. Really good voice actors can do both of those voices.
George Zanza did the voice, and it was perfect. He did a wonderful job.
He was so great. He was so schizophrenic and wonderful. And people ask, is that the same guy?
Okay, dummy, yank the gag.
Yes, Mr. Scarface.
We wanted to make the dummy as live as possible, so we did have scenes where the dummy was by itself. Batman would sneak into the room, and he'd look at this dummy, and it seems alive. It even startles Batman.
The puppet was the real challenge, and yet he had to take care of the guy that was talking, so who does he hit? And who does he beat up? And ended up beating up both, which was great.
And the reason really is because we can inflict all sorts of hideous violence on the dummy. You can shoot him up like, you can cut him into pieces. You can do hideous things to him that you can never get away with doing on a person. Whatever, would you want to?
I just think Scarface is one of the best villains. He's one of these villains that you're horrified and you laugh at the same time, and those are the best villains.
Arnold, don't do this.
It's out of my hands.
He's the puppet, not you. Ghul.
Ra's al Ghul was a big-time member of the Batman Rogues Galleries to comic book fans, but he had never appeared in any other media. He'd never been in any of the cartoons or the TV shows or anything, so people at home didn't know who the heck he was. But us being hardcore comic book geeks and really loving those original Denny O'Neil, Neil Adams, Ra's al Ghul stories, we really wanted to do them.
He represents a break from Batman's traditional rogues gallery in that he's not really born of Gotham City. He's from overseas. He's a leader of a global empire of assassins. Nobody really knows his name, or they've heard whispers of it, yet the man is immensely wealthy, immensely powerful.
The strange thing about Ra's is he really wants to preserve the Earth. He sees modern technology and the way things are going as destructive. But he has no problem with offing as many people as possible in order to preserve the planet. And Batman clearly can't allow him to do that.
We didn't want to do any ghost stories, but with Ra's al Ghul it made sense because he's a very spiritual guy. This guy been living forever.
He's relatively immortal. He's lived hundreds of years and has a beautiful daughter that loves Batman. And that makes things tough because he kind of likes her too.
It's the ultimate temptation story, because by agreeing to follow Ra's, Batman can accomplish everything he set out to do: wipe out crime, restore order, and kind of in a weird way get his father back. But Batman is too clever to see for that. He knows that as attractive as a lot of that is, he can't succumb to that. That's truly going to evil.
The Riddler.
Hey, diddle diddle. Time for a riddle.
Boy, oh boy, the Riddler. What do we do with the Riddler?
Okay, here's this guy who's gonna commit all these crimes, and he sends a bunch of clues to Batman, and Batman, bang, 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 figures out the clues and stops the Riddler from committing his crimes and hauls him off to jail.
It was hard not to make the show feel too much like the 60s Adam West show, where people are standing around trying to solve a riddle.
Everybody kind of has in their mind, they can't help it, they think of the late Frank Gorshin as the Riddler. He had left such a mark on everybody's mind as to what that character was.
He was brilliant. He, was the Riddler. But the thing is, his Riddler was very similar to the Joker's personality. And knowing that we were going to do that really manic Joker, we knew we had to do something different with the Riddler. We didn't want to just him be just a Joker clone.
I thought, let's bring in John Glover, because there is a quality to his voice that's scary. Just a little. He's the nicest man on the planet, but there's something about him that's a little bit scary.
On a pure graphic approach, we tried to keep him lean, cut, so that he could pose a physical threat if he needed to. We know we can get him into a fight with Batman, but are we going to be able to sell the audience on this riddle? Are we going to make it too complicated to where no one ever would have figured this out to begin with?
So it was hard to make a show where you could do that, make the riddles seem interesting.
And it's better if the riddles are like hidden things that you don't quite see, you don't quite know what's happening.
So we tried to make him smart and to offer the threat that no one was going to be able to outsmart him.
Yeah!
Clayface. No! Hey! Ho, ho, ho!
Mother Dios, Clayface!
There's actually been any number of Clayfaces. I know at the time that we did the show, there had been at least 3 different really strong incarnations of him. The very first Clayface in the comics was a guy named Basil Carlo, who was an old school horror movie actor. And there was one named Matt Hagen. He's the one who dove into the underground pool of clay and got turned into Clayface. So he was kind of a combination of those two.
His strength is inhuman. Could be chemically induced.
He's sort of an amalgam of all the Clayfaces in the comics.
We kind of picked and chose among the different versions of Clayface in the comics. And then, of course, the shape-shifting thing was, again, just a natural for cartoons. It's like, that was just like, oh yeah, we're all over that.
Great thing about being a shapeshifter, I can blend in with the crowd outside, make my getaway, and rip off some other joint.
The thing that people remember the most about our version of Clayface was just the amazing visuals that we were able to pull off.
Stay out of it.
We were amazingly fortunate that we got the great Japanese animation studio, TMS, because they just really went to town on all the shape-shifting stuff.
The original Clayface was a kind of a complicated design. For the New Adventure season, we decided to simplify him slightly. He's a little more streamlined.
It wasn't a radical departure from the way he looked before, but again, he was a little bit more angular. He didn't look quite as melty.
Drippy and gooey and fun.
Less surface detail, less bumps and stuff.
He looked a little bit more like a giant mud man instead of just a big pile of vomit.
Now we can cut out the games.
Scarecrow.
Scared you, didn't I?
Scarecrow was a character who went through a number of evolutions. Originally, the character was very cerebral. You know, Jonathan Crane was a guy who was experimenting with a fear drug, but there was always something a little bit not too quite scary about him.
The Scarecrow should be kind of scary, and no matter what you do with it, a guy with, you know, a jack-o'-lantern face and Scarecrow clothes is not scary.
Yeah, I'm not sure how the change came about of the look. That may have come from Bruce.
He wanted to go from just making him a scarecrow to almost appearing like a corpse. And he evolved the most of all the characters. We got darker and darker and darker with the character.
So we took a really radical departure, and we kind of made him look, you know, we put the noose around his neck and kind of gave him like kind of Western preacher clothes and gave him like this, you know, Texas Chainsaw Massacre Leatherface kind of look, and really had nothing to do with being a scarecrow per se, but he was definitely scary.
He looked like a hanged man who had been cut down and you know, had gone off to terrorize people. We weren't even sure if there was an actual guy in the suit.
When we all saw that model, we went, oh, yes, that's it.
Fear is power.
On the redesign, I believe we recast him, and Jeffrey Combs did his voice, the Reanimator.
We all watched it come to life. We actually saw it come to life and said, that's absolutely right. That is how that voice should be for that drawing.
What's the use of providing me with test patients if you're going to lose them? You should have monitored him more carefully.
They just had him whisper, and that whispery rasp was so scary. They realized, you know, maybe we were trying too hard earlier. Maybe you didn't need that much. Just a really scary, dark-looking guy with the noose around his neck and a nice raspy whisper. Yeah, that'll do it. That's pretty scary.
Poison Ivy.
She's stunning. She's got a waist about that big. She's got a beautiful curvaceous figure. She's got a great face.
Pucker up.
But she was also a serious character.
Your hyenas have been watering my plants again. One more time and they're mulch.
In the original Batman series, she was played more human, who had a plant motif. With the New Adventures, it was decided to push her more in the otherworldly territory by making her skin slightly green and making her more elfin looking.
Who told you to do that?
The first Poison Ivy sort of established the kind of character that she was, this vixen who just was plant nuts.
While she cares about plants, she doesn't care so much about people.
I think the stuff is wearing off.
Can't have that. Give him another shot.
Trouncing all over men's emotions and controlling them.
Time for a goodnight kiss.
A bit more of the plant gimmick got brought into her character. The idea of controlling men through certain lipstick and pheromones and basically being the woman that no man can resist.
Step lively there, Brucey.
About the only human being that she ever shows really any sign of affection for at all is Harley. And that's more just kind of like in a big sister kind of way.
Aw, gee, Harley, you broke our new toy.
There were some really strong episodes where she developed her own offspring.
What are you?
She actually created a bride for Bruce Wayne.
Why, Bruce? I'm your wife.
So you can do really bizarre plant flesh things that are really icky, but they're fun stories to watch.
She's an interesting, dark character.
Merry Christmas, darling.
Mr. Freeze.
Some characters are, you know, there's not a lot there to work with in their original state. In the comics, with Mr. Freeze, we had a kind of a cool name and a guy in a walking refrigerator. In thinking about the character, Bruce and I decided maybe there's some great tragedy in his life that basically killed him emotionally, and so he's just a shell of a man, maybe going for, you know, for vengeance because he grieves for a great loss.
Our first design on Mr. Freeze, going back to the very beginning of Batman the Animated Series, I had contacted Mike Mignola, who was a really well-known comic book artist. This was before he became famous for Hellboy. And he came up with this really, really severely retro-looking Mr. Freeze design, which looked like this old-school-looking, you know, almost robot suit.
We did a revamp. We wanted to tweak him a bit. Sub-Zero had been done, and essentially sort of took away his motivation by curing his wife. So we kind of decided to cut off his head and make him a robot.
So we thought if we were going to bring Mr. Freeze back again, we had to give him all new motivation. It became about the fact that, you know, he's separated from his wife now. You know, she's alive, but he's a monster now, and he can never be with her. So it became all about him just hating everybody and hating everything and destroying everything that everybody loves, you know, so they could feel the same amount of pain that he feels. I thought this was all good stuff. This was all good story material. So, and of course, we had to go back and redesign his costume again. And it's still kind of retro, but it's a little bit slicker, like we did with a lot of the revamped characters. We put a lot more black on it.
We're sensitive to him because he had love, he had emotion, he had all these feelings, and they were taken from him. And he so desires to have them back, and yet has no capability to actually feel them.
Up until the time we were doing Batman Beyond, you know, we were always found a different way of going with him, and it was always fun to revisit Mr. Freeze and see what he was up to.
There's no hope for me, or you, or your city. Everyone's going to feel my loss. The Penguin.
Penguin was always a tricky one. He was one of those characters that, again, had a really good visual in the comics.
The Penguin can be a totally comical character. It's easy because of how he is drawn. He's so round. He's a penguin.
He's a tough villain because he's just a chubby guy, and even though he might be great with the umbrella and he might have all kinds of judo moves and all that, you don't feel that he's a great threat against, a physical threat against Batman.
Well, in the redesign, we went back to the original source material of the Penguin that differed from the Batman animated series and from the movie.
One of the joys of doing the revamp was finally getting able to do the Jack Burnley Penguin design, kind of a 19th century British gentleman caricature.
I'm a legitimate businessman now. I don't want to draw attention to myself.
Ideally, you want to get a voice with character, meaning that the actor has a quality to his voice all by itself without putting on a cartoon voice.
I've been a huge Paul Williams fan, like forever, and he had just exactly the right vocal quality for the Penguin.
He was never going to become the dark and scary super villain that someone like the Joker would. So Paul's voice was appropriate for that version of the Penguin.
Living well is the best revenge.
He's trying to turn over a new leaf, and he's trying to pretend to everybody that he's a respectable gentleman of society now and not really a criminal, and of course he's doing all kinds of, you know, dastardly deeds out of the back.
We kind of felt like, you know, for the new show, because he wasn't the supervillain anymore, it didn't seem appropriate to give him all the umbrella stick.
My way would have been so much more pleasant.
But he's still a thug. He's still a criminal. So he gets to have a machine gun hidden in one.
Two-Face.
Attention, people of Gotham City.
I love Two-Face. Two-Face was one of my favorite villains.
He's right up there with the Joker as far as Batman's key villains go.
He's a guy that is respected in society and a friend of Bruce Wayne. And he has a horrible accident and becomes a maniacal, schizophrenic killer.
Alan Burnett did come up with the innovation of actually giving him psychological problems before he even became Two-Face. He was already kind of having a Jekyll and Hyde thing even before that. And then the accident that turns him into Two-Face just really exacerbated the problem.
One of the things that we took from the more recent comic books was the idea that when Batman started his career as Batman, he had a secret ally in the city that was Harvey Dent, the district attorney. And so it becomes very tragic when Two-Face is scarred and he becomes a villain, because it's like Batman lost one of the true friends that he had.
You're too late, Batman. Better find yourself another mask.
It's not any radical departure from what he looks like in the comics. I mean, the one innovation that I've seen other artists, carry on afterwards, which is kind of neat, is half black, half white. It's like that's literally the character.
We just basically simplified it, changed the color of his face, changed some of the features a little bit, but the opposite sides of his personality are represented in color rather than a lot of surface detail.
It looked even better in the revamped episodes when he gave him that real squared off shoulders and the real sharp lines on his suit. I mean, he looked even slicker.
He still flips the coin. He still has the duality and the crimes based on twos. He adapted the best to the new design, I think, and to the new series, because he really felt very much like the old character.
I just think he's like one of the top 10 comic book villains of all time.
Order in the court in the matter of the people versus Harvey Dent. How does the prisoner plead?
Guilty. Guilty. Guilty.
I was doing a Joker episode, the first one I had written, and I wanted the Joker to have a gang, and I wanted there to be a girl in the gang. And at first I was going back and forth on what kind of a girl she should be. Should she be sort of like a tough chick who just sort of took orders and said, "Yeah, boss," or should she have a little bit of pepper to her? And I liked the idea of someone who could kind of keep up with the Joker, and not only keep up with him, but might also get a laugh out of something she said, whereas the Joker might not get a laugh, and that would infuriate him. And yet there should be sort of like a Punch and Judy dynamic to him. That makes the villain a little more well-rounded for me. Joker's sort of a hard villain in the fact that he's the least human of all of Batman's adversaries. He doesn't come from a sympathetic background such as Two-Face or Ivy or the Mad Hatter or some of the other ones. So you have to look at other ways to flesh out his personality, and we thought, well, it would be good if he had somebody to play off of. So Harley came, it was sort of like a one-shot character. Then people liked her. I liked her, so I would put her in other stories. Bruce would say, like, what, Harley again? We're going to put the girl in there again? And I go, yeah, well, she's sort of cute. And the other directors came to like her, and then Bruce and I sat down over lunch one day, and we came up with an origin story, and we did that as a comic book, and that really sort of grounded the character, the sort of reality of where she fit into the Batman universe.
Harley Quinn.
Righta-rooney. Give me some sugar, baby.
She just began as a sort of a hench girl.
And she was never meant to be more than just a one-shot character. Deanie came up with the idea for Harley.
I patterned her a little bit after my friend Arlene Sorkin, who TV comedian, and who wound up doing her voice also.
Righta-rooney.
And outside of Lucille Ball, I don't know who could have played Harley as well as Arlene did.
Look, piano.
And we thought, wouldn't it be great if it turns out she's got a very dark connection to the Joker? In fact, that she was his doctor in the insane asylum, and he kind of seduced her and snapped her mind. So I came up with the name Harley Quinn because that seemed very clownish.
Harley Quinzel. Rework it a bit, and you get Harley Quinn.
Looking at actual Harley Quinns, the thing is, their costumes are just covered with design work. And but the one thing that I did notice was the diamond shapes that they were covered in. So that was something that I was able to incorporate into the Harley design.
Harley's look was probably the least changed of all the villains. Basically, she was just slimmed down slightly, but the design in of itself wasn't dramatic.
She's someone who kind of loves a little bit too much and too unwisely, and that's her downfall.
It's kind of like, you know, the big dumb thug in high school that has the cute young cheerleader, and she just doesn't know how bad this guy is, and you want to kind of rescue her.
It's the most pathetic thing, but she works beautifully. You're laughing at her because she has a sense of humor about it.
She was the perfect foil for the Joker, where he couldn't resist being without her, but every time she was around, he had to sort of think about her before he would commit his next offense.
Somewhere deep down in whatever shriveled up little nut he has for a heart, there might be a little bit of affection for her. I think Harley is a very accessible villain, and I think she's maybe not as dark as some of the others are painted.
You immediately gravitate to her because she is, at her core, she's pretty innocent.
I think a lot of fans like that. They like that she is someone who can get out of danger with a smile and a little laugh and just sort of somersault away.
Face it, Harl, this stinks. You're a certified nutso wanted in 12 states and hopelessly in love with a psychopathic clown. At what point did my life go Looney Tunes?
The Joker.
Let the good times roll!
You know, the thing with the Joker is that in the long comic book history of the character, he started off as pretty much a straight homicidal maniac, and then they kind of made him goofier and goofier. And then he became kind of a joke.
Mother always said I had talent.
And then this time they brought him back as a serious, psychotic killer.
The Joker in our show could not kill because it was a children's television show.
Instead of him murdering people, we would have him give him that hideous Joker grin, which in its own way is almost worse.
I really have to congratulate myself on this one.
I never liked clowns. Yeah, they always gave me the willies.
Joker's the perfect Batman villain because he's the antithesis of Batman.
A bat in the hand is worth two in the belfry.
It's antimatter and matter facing each other.
I don't really know why he's such a perfect yin to Batman's yang, because the characters are really dissimilar. I mean, there's nothing, you know, historical about clowns and bats. You're losing your edge.
Joker is the flip side of Batman. Batman's grim, Joker's happy.
The personal hatred that the Joker has towards Batman, the fact that he just wanted the limelight.
A countdown of victims that will end at midnight, unless our dear Dark Knight stops me first.
Mark Hamill just nailed that part perfectly. When the second we heard that scary laugh, we knew he had the Joker.
It's actually really fun to watch him perform the character because all of the other actors are all seated and Mark has to stand to do it, and he gets his whole body into it.
You could actually videotape Mark Hamill recording the voice and use some of that for the animation. He is so articulate in his physical acting.
What made the Joker so much fun was that he didn't have anything really at stake. He just set out to do whatever he wanted, and it was more of a challenge to Batman to say, try and catch me.
It's time I capped off our feud with his ultimate humiliation.
I don't know if there's another situation in pop culture villains where the villain and the hero are just so white and black.